not sure in which direction. I ended up titling my comments From Hope to Heartbreak Revisited, ? And that's a reference to an essay that I published. It was analyzing the first 2 years of the Clinton presidency, and that title of that chapter is From Hope to Heartbreak. And that was a reference to the man from Hope, and it was looking at after the Gingrich revolution, that took over 2 years into the Clinton presidency, of where there were some supporters of Bill Clinton who were somewhat disheartened after the first couple of years. And so I find myself at least wondering or asking some similar questions. But what I would like to do in these comments this afternoon is to talk about leadership Obama style. I also want to make a few comments about political media and citizens, and that section is titled Political Media and Citizens Gone Wild. And then finally, the state of public discourse or political deliberation in America, and I might cut that one short after our luncheon speaker this afternoon, and then hopefully tie these together. And my transitions or tie is what sort of presidential leadership can we have, or should we have, or do we need to have in the type of political media environment that we have today, that then has some effect, I think, on the type of public discourse or political deliberation in America. But first, what sort of leader is our historic 44th POTUS? He told us in his own words that he wanted to be a post-partisan leader, a leader of the country that's neither red state nor blue state, but the United States of America. And then quoting some of my students, we might ask, so how's that working out for you? I think leadership Obama style, I would point to two characteristics, and then I'll try to provide some evidence for both of those. First, something of a laissez-faire style of leadership that oftentimes appears to be hands-off, let the wheels of government work, and that would be the more charitable description. Others might say weak and removed. Secondly, a characteristic, and then I'm going to quote some journalists and pundits here, at times a failure to articulate or defend a coherent ideological position, particularly on issues that seem somewhat discrepant from what we heard in the campaign. Now, this laissez-faire style, some political wagon, I don't have the site here, wrote somewhere in the past few months when we went after the first year of Obama's presidency, the article was titled Obama's Lost Year. And this is not, of course, to, I think, minimize the recent healthcare reform, passage of healthcare reform, to quote our vice president, which certainly was a big effing deal. But on this major accomplishment, the enactment of healthcare reform, what we witnessed in that year was, after Obama came into office, first said that hopefully by May, but then by the July recess of last year, we'll have the bill, but then sometime in the fall perhaps, but certainly by the time Congress leaves for the winter recess, but then certainly by the time of the late January State of the Union address, but hopefully sometime in the spring. So finally last month, as an exhausted Congress, and I think country, saw the passage of health care reform, which we're still quite not certain in some instances of what has exactly been enacted. I think this illustrates some of the laissez-faire style approach, certainly to his signature policy. Now, in terms of ideological or partisan position, or this inability, or this want of not red or blue, John Meacham, writing in Newsweek, pointed to Obama's what he called inspiration gap, and noted that Obama seems intent on not being overly ideological or partisan. And now, back to my words, instead pursuing a more pragmatic agenda, sometimes even at the expense of principle. This style and rhetoric is devoid of the hope and enthusiasm that certainly energized while on the campaign trail. George Packer, writing in the New York Times, pride in responsible process is the closest thing to an Obama ideology. Now, of course, some of this is the difference between campaigning and governing, and particularly as Hillary Clinton pointed out on the campaign trail, you do campaign with poetry, but then govern with prose. But I think the danger for the post-partisan pragmatic Obama is that you may begin to lose or demoralize your base, including that all-important segment that we sometimes refer to as independents. And we're starting to see or try to understand now what's happening with that segment of the electorate in terms of support or lack of support for the presidency. So there's some picture of the Obama governing style, at least some characteristics that I think are important. Let me move quickly now to the media and citizenry gone wild, question mark. And again, keeping in mind my transition here is the type of leadership style necessary or capable of governing in our current media environment. I think, and others have argued, that we're in something of a transition period now in terms of political media. The decline of traditional broadcast news media over the past half century, losing audience size and readership for print media, leading to this new economic model for our profit-based news media. Now, this new model seems to be to carve out a niche based largely on partisanship and ideological positioning. It used to be just a few years ago, we would point to the Fox News of the world and say, wow, that's just dangerous. But now we see, and MSNBC, of course, learned its lesson in terms of how to find its niche. Now we're asking, and you can read reports just in the past few weeks on how can CNN survive, or what must CNN needs to do to find its niche. And increasingly, in this post-broadcast environment, it seems that these major media outlets are finding its niche and its partisanship, its ideological positioning. And all of this, of course, is happening at the same time, and I think in some ways because of this thing that we now call the new media, the internet and the blogosphere and the tweeting and the YouTubing, as our sources of political news and fact, where we have no traditional gatekeepers. In essence, we all are the news media. And we heard some of this morning, in essence, we can all have our own facts in terms of those facts that are fueling our debate and